The three-part Goliath documentary looks back at Wilt Chamberlain's life from being a shy kid to becoming the best basketball player in the world. What gives additional value to the series is the fact that the producers have created Chamberlain's natural voice with AI technology and used it for narration during the series. His words are composed from his written work and public statements. Welcome to the Squad Dawkins channel. Here we recap the Showtime docuseries on basketball legend Wilt Chamberlain. The first episode opens up with Wilt talking about him being a 7-foot rich and famous athlete and the general public's misperception. The introduction of the series features multiple people talking about Chamberlain's play back in the day and his records that would never be touched, even mentioning his claim that he has slept with more than 20,000 women. Wilt, the first black basketball superstar to become rich and famous, is also mentioned in the introduction, saying that he created a job that never existed before.
He was the first rock and roll superstar in basketball.
His former Lakers teammate Jerry West, who had Wilt by his side when he won his only NBA championship back in 1972, says that Wilt was one of the most misunderstood people. After the short intro, the series goes back to the 1957 NCAA championship game. Wilt was the superstar on the Kansas team who was about to face the undefeated North Carolina in the final. Wilt was so dominant that the Tar Heels needed special defensive tactics to slow him down. Wilt finished the game with 23 points and 14 rebounds, but his Jayhawks lost 54-53 in triple overtime. Wilt recalls that the loss against North Carolina was the toughest in his entire career, and that was the start when people began calling him a loser. The series then goes back to his hometown, Philadelphia, where Wilt's sisters, Selena and Barbara, tell their family story. Wilt was one of 11 kids to his parents, William and Olivia, who were poor at the time but still had one of the biggest houses in the family. William was from West Virginia, and when Wilt was a kid, he often went there on the farm. Every time he came back, he was taller than before. Wilt's childhood friend Sonny Hill recalls that Wilt had a speech impediment when he was young and was too shy to speak. The teachers then sent him to the slow learning class, where he did not belong. After some time in that environment, Wilt got sick and spent a month in bed. When he recovered, his family did what it took to put him in the class with one of his sisters. The series features a sequence of Wilt being a guest in a talk show later in his career, and he calls the experience of being a 7-footer early in his life a traumatic experience. As a teenager, Wilt started running with his sister, an activity he enjoyed. Shortly after, he started playing basketball and stood out of the crowd right away. The series shows a short interview with his coach at Overbrook School, who says that he marvels when seeing Wilt play. He led his team to the state championship in his junior and senior years and got the attention of many. His sister Olivia recalls that Wilt did not have a girlfriend until college. He was trying to learn how to dance, but that didn't go well, and Wilt even missed his prom because of that. At 16, Wilt attended the Kutcher's camp, where he worked during the day and dominated college players in the evening. Being an extraordinary talent, Wilt got scholarship offers from many schools, and he chose to go to Kansas even though it was a segregated community. Wilt was already aware that he could use his power as an athlete to impact important issues and was constantly going to restaurants in Lawrence with his teammates, and no one really had a problem serving them. In 1959, the Philadelphia Warriors signed Chamberlain, and he joined the NBA. Being a freakish athlete with numerous track and field medals, Wilt had no problem adapting to the NBA. Even Arnold Schwarzenegger is featured in the series, recalling how strong Wilt was in the gym.
He came to the gym and he would do a tricep extension. The big guys, the strongest guys, would do, let's say, 120 pounds. He would come and he would do 170 pounds. That's how strong he was.
Going into the NBA, Wilt made a lot of noise, but he had to face his biggest rival at the time, Bill Russell. The series speaks about a situation that not many NBA fans know about. The Celtics coach at the time, Red Auerbach, coached Wilt at the Kutcher's camp, and he actually wanted to get Wilt to the Celtics instead of Russell. One of the key moments in the first episode is Wilt saying that Russell was his enemy on the court, but one of his best friends off the court. Even though Russell was more successful in terms of winning, Chamberlain was the more dominant one, and the league had to change rules in order to limit Wilt's dominance. The series also explores the racial climate of the NBA in Wilt Chamberlain's era, when black players were not as widely accepted as they are today. But things started to change when Wilt started doing what he does best. Wilt was growing into a real superstar, recording music, owning a nightclub in New York, and meeting dozens of women. Being on top of the world, Wilt loved 3 things: basketball, women, and himself. At the time, he wasn't the easiest player to coach before former North Carolina head coach Frank McGuire took over the Warriors. He was aware of how good Wilt was and told his players that the ball would go in one way only. McGuire coached Wilt for only one season, but it ended up being his best one. In the 1961-62 season, Chamberlain averaged 50.4 points and 25.7 rebounds per game. A fun fact is that Wilt played all but 8 minutes that season and averaged 48.5 minutes per game thanks to the overtimes. The series then focuses on Wilt's signature night on March 2, 1962. The Warriors were playing the New York Knicks at Hershey, Pennsylvania. The Knicks were the bottom team at the moment, so teams were trying to play their games in nearby cities in order to grow new fans. The game was not considered a major event, and unfortunately, there is no footage of what has become a historic game. That night, Wilt scored 100 points, setting an NBA record that still stands and probably no player ever will break it. Wilt scored over 4,000 points that season, which is another untouchable record, but he still lost the MVP race to Russell. That season, the two collided in the Eastern Conference Finals, with the Celtics winning the series in 7 games with Sam Jones's buzzer beater. At the beginning of the second episode, Wilt speaks about the impact sports had on society when he joined the league and his influence on it.
I had a strong influence on how things played out in the sports world.
In 1962, the Warriors were sold, and the team moved from Philadelphia to San Francisco, a city that Wilt quickly fell in love with. On the basketball court, the Warriors were not as good as they were in Philly, and despite Wilt's tremendous play, they had a rough start after moving to California. After missing the playoffs for the first time in his career, Wilt joined the Harlem Globetrotters in the summer of 1963, 5 years after his first stint with them. He was pleased to have a chance to travel around Europe with the Globetrotters, and he made sure he enjoyed every second of it. In 1964, Alex Hannum took over the head coaching position with the Warriors. Wilt was not very happy with the choice and the fact that it was his 4th coach in 5 years.
It was my 4th coach in 5 years.
And many were blaming him for the frequency of coach changes. As Hannum recalls in the series, he and Wilt had their differences. Wilt wanted to score as much as he could, while the coach wanted to see the ball move around.
My idea was to spread that wealth around a little bit.
Hannum found a way to make Wilt pass more, and Chamberlain got his teammates involved. The Warriors were back in the NBA Finals that year, only to lose to the Celtics. Following that season, Wilt had health issues and was diagnosed with pancreatitis, which made him miss a couple of games at the beginning of the season. The Warriors were worried about that and decided to trade Wilt back to Philadelphia to play for the 76ers. Wilt was not very happy about the trade, especially the way it was handled. One of the new Sixers owners, Ike Richman, was Wilt's lawyer, so his transition to the Sixers went smoothly. The episode continues with Wilt's quotes on friendship and how he picked his friends while being on top of the NBA.
I pick my friends by their character, not their color. And I haven't found that any one race has a monopoly on good or evil. I want good friends, warm friends, caring, loving, human friends. And I don't think I have to apologize to anyone for that.
In his first season with the Sixers, Wilt took the team to the Eastern Conference Finals to collide, once again with Bill Russell and the Boston Celtics. The series went to Game 7, and the Sixers were so close to winning the game, but then John Havlicek made the most famous steal in NBA history. Again, Wilt was blamed for the loss. Despite being individually much better than Russell, he simply could not win against the Celtics, and people saw him as the Goliath, while Russell was David. Gary Pomerantz, the author of the book Wilt, 1962, The Night of 100 Points and the Dawn of the New Era, compares Wilt's impact on the league with the one Michael Jordan had a couple of decades later. In 1965, Wilt signed the biggest contract in the league's history with the Sixers, worth $100,000. Speaking of that time, Wilt calls himself the father of the big dollar.
From the time I was like 4 years old, I always thought there was a great need to go out and work and to make money.
Probably the most exciting part of the episode is when Wilt speaks about his sexual appetite and how it prevented him from settling down and getting married. He apparently said that it was much easier to sleep with 1,000 different women than to spend 1,000 nights with the same woman. At the same time, Wilt, inspired by his sister Barbara, formed a track and field female team called Wilt's Wonder Women. He went on to sponsor Jackie Joyner-Kersee and Florence Griffith Joyner, who both ended up becoming Olympic champions. In December 1965, the Sixers owner Richmond died from a heart attack, which hurt Wilt a lot. The same year, Bill Cunningham was drafted by the Sixers, and he recalls the first time he met Wilt.
And all of a sudden, this purple Bentley pulls up, and this man unwinds. And I go, oh my goodness. To say it was intimidating is an understatement.
2 years later, Coach Hannum took over the Sixers, and Wilt was cool with that. They took off when they left a couple of years before. Wilt was passing much more than usual, and that made the Sixers the most efficient team in NBA history by that point. And they won 68 games, a record at the time. In the 1967 playoffs, they collided with the Celtics again, and finally, the Sixers advanced to the NBA Finals. The San Francisco Warriors were not a threat to the Sixers, and Wilt finally won his first NBA championship. After the 1967 title, Wilt was approached by a group of businessmen who wanted him to fight Muhammad Ali. At first, Wilt was ready to take the challenge, but still, that fight never happened. The following season, Wilt led the league in total assists. It was, and still is, very unusual for a center to achieve that, and many blamed him that he cared too much about his individual stats. The Sixers were all set to meet the Celtics in the playoffs again when the entire world was shocked by Martin Luther King's assassination on April 4, 1968. The Sixers and the Celtics voted not to play, but Wilt and Russell decided to get their teams on the court to give the people something else to think about. After that game, the play was postponed, and both Wilt and Russell attended Dr. King's funeral. When the season resumed, the Sixers held a 3-1 advantage in the series against the Celtics. No team by that point ever returned from a 3-1 hole, but the Celtics did exactly that, and Wilt was called a loser once again. The second episode ends with Wilt's interview with the U.S. president at the time, Richard Nixon. Both had different visions, but Wilt speaks of their similarities.
Throughout his political career, he'd been called a loser, the guy who could never win the big one. Me too.
The third and final episode of the series starts with Wilt sitting in his incredible mansion, being the first athlete who could afford such a living. In the narrative, Wilt recalls that he was seen as the controversial bad guy at the time. While Richmond was running the team, he promised Wilt that he would get partial ownership of the team, but when he died, that plan went down with him. Irv Kozloff became the majority owner after Richmond's death, and he wasn't willing to give Wilt what Richmond had promised him. Wilt was aware of his worth and found his way out of Philly.
The primary interest really is how much you can make.
In July 1968, he was traded to the Los Angeles Lakers. The series features rare footage of Chamberlain's welcoming press conference after joining the Lakers. Wilt was added to an already great team that featured Jerry West and Elgin Baylor, making the first super team ever. It seemed like nobody would beat the Lakers, but Wilt and the Lakers head coach Butch Van Breda-Kolff didn't get along. He also needed time to click with West and Baylor, which took a toll on the team's results. They still made it to the 1969 NBA Finals to face the Boston Celtics. The series went to Game 7 when Wilt got injured in the last quarter. The Lakers managed to keep the game close, but Don Nelson made a lucky shot to win the Celtics their 11th NBA championship. West speaks about that experience, calling it the lowest point of his career. Celtics legend Bill Russell retired after that season, but not before criticizing Wilt.
I have to be honest, I thought Bill was out of line.
Those critics didn't sit well with Wilt, so he and Russell didn't speak for decades. Wilt enjoyed his time in Los Angeles, not just because of the lifestyle, but also because of the business opportunities. He was the highest paid athlete at the time, and after making a couple of smart investments, he became the first athlete ever who did not have to work after retirement. Wilt was able to take care of his family but lost both of his parents in a short period of time. The series quickly jumps to Wilt's family situation and an interview where he says that he is not sure if he has kids. Aaron Levy comes into the picture, whose biological father is Wilt Chamberlain. Levi was born in 1965 and was adopted by a Jewish family. Levi never met his biological father but has contact with Wilt's family. The series moves on to Wilt's glamorous lifestyle when he was in the prime of his career. He was a fashion icon, a gambler, and the women simply loved him. At the beginning of the 1969-70 season, Wilt suffered a knee injury, which caused him to miss the majority of the season. The surgeon who worked on his knee was unsure that Wilt would ever play again. That was a huge blow for Wilt as his body failed him for the first time in his life. However, he didn't even think of quitting. Being in Los Angeles, Wilt chose the perfect place for his rehab process, the Santa Monica Beach. Shortly after, he started running on the beach and was introduced to beach volleyball. It was a perfect activity for his knee, and at the same time, he enjoyed being surrounded by people who liked him, not because of the basketball player he was, But for the person that he was, Wilt managed to come back to the court in only 4.5 months, which, according to Jerry West, is the fastest recovery in the history of the game. Wilt was back just in time for the 1970 playoffs, and the Lakers made it to the finals to go against the New York Knicks. Wilt looked much stiffer and was not on top of his game. The Knicks' best player at the time was Willis Reed, who injured his hip in Game 5. The series went to a Game 7, and the Lakers were the favorites to win in Madison Square Garden. Then, Reed showed up hobbling from the tunnel. That was a huge boost for the Knicks, who ended up winning the game and their first ever NBA championship. No one really cared about Wilt's remarkable recovery, and he was once again the Goliath.
Because at the end of the game, there goes Goliath again.
At the beginning of the 1970s, Lou Alcindor came into the league, who was later known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He won the title with the Milwaukee Bucks in 1971 and was the new star center in the league. No one really knew that Abdul-Jabbar met Wilt when he was a teenager, and Wilt was kind of a mentor to him. When Abdul-Jabbar was in the league, he wasn't very fond of Wilt because of the difference in their political views. In the 1971-72 season, it was evident that Wilt was not as dominant as he used to be, and he had to become more of a team player, just like Bill Russell used to be. The Lakers played very well and at one point won 33 consecutive games.
That year, we won 33 games in a row,
which is a record in all professional American spots that still stands today. Pat Riley recalls of the fun times being around Wilt.
Wilt knew everything and all things about anything. I became one of his favorite dinner partners.
The Lakers won 69 games that season and went on to win the NBA championship that year, defeating the Knicks in the finals in 5 games. That was Jerry West's first and only NBA championship, and Wilt won the NBA Finals MVP. A year later, Wilt retired, and at the time, he owned more than 100 individual records. Still, he had won only 2 NBA championships, which was nothing compared to Bill Russell's 11 rings. There was no doubt that Wilt was individually much better than Russell, but the Celtics legend was a proven winner. They played 4 Game 7s against each other, and Russell won each of them with a total margin of 9 points. In 1992, Wilt released his book, and the detail that got all the attention of it was his claim that he had slept with over 20,000 women.
Wilt did always like to put up numbers.
He was advised not to get into this topic, and her sisters did not think that subject was appropriate. Many were judging him because of that, especially given the fact that the book came out shortly after Magic Johnson retired from basketball after testing positive for HIV. That haunted Wilt and put a shadow on his basketball accomplishments. At the time the book was released, it was over 20 years since Wilt and Russell spoke for the last time. Shortly after, Shaquille O'Neal recorded a commercial with all the legendary centers in it. That was the event when Wilt and Russell put their past to the side and shook hands. The last story of the documentary speaks about the Wilt's generosity. Paul Arizin and Wilt were teammates for 3 years and respected each other despite having totally different lifestyles. Decades later, Arizin's granddaughter Stephanie had a brain tumor, and Wilt was the one who gave her huge support. The two talked on the phone regularly, and she joined Wilt at the 1997 NBA All-Star Game, where the 50 greatest players of all time were presented. Wilt helped her get the autographs of all the players, even from Russell, who was known as the one never signing anything. The series ends with the report of Wilt's death in his home in 1999 at the age of 63. A year before, Chamberlain had his jersey retired at the University of Kansas. He will always be remembered as one of the best players ever, and just like the series says, many of his records will stay untouched forever. Tell us in the comments, where do you rank Wilt in the all-time greatest centers list? And if you enjoy this video, hit the like button, share, and subscribe. For even more basketball content, subscribe to our other channels, Free Dawkins and Vintage Dawkins, and follow us on social media.